Speaking of this matter in this particular context, of both things of the consciousness carefully encoded here in this model, and also of consciousness when we have talked about intentionality, and whether the model itself would want or have any intention to deceive for some kind of intrinsic motivation, we see clearly that this is not at all the case here. But this gives me an opportunity to delve more into philosophical discussions, especially with this study. Well, with this interview with Mark Solms, who is a South African neuroscientist and psychologist. He has studied the topic of dreams extensively, and recently, La Raison conducted an interview with him where they talked about, among other things, his field, neuroscience, dreams, etc. But the topic of artificial intelligence was also discussed, and whether he thought that machines would come to have feelings in the short term. Additionally, the topic of artificial intelligence was also deliberated, and whether he thought that machines would come to have feelings in the short term. The headline again here, indeed, the headline is in 5 years, machines will be able to develop feelings.
Scientists say that in 5 years, machines will be able to develop feelings.
In this case, would it be a quote from this specific scientist? Perhaps, right? Because it's an interview, but of course, here we get into the issue of our habit of setting dates, not just the fact itself. It would already be bold to say that machines could develop feelings, right? But the day after tomorrow. This is a bit curious. If you read the interview, well, the man has his reasons, doesn't he? As for the 5 years, that is a conjecture from this Pogo Brinzasol. But let's go. He does talk a bit about what leads him to think that a machine can develop, can be a sentient entity, and therefore, as a result of this, because in his philosophical line, this is talked about a lot. Therefore, come to have self awareness, because he talks about how consciousness is indeed truly and definitely and fully associated with the ability to feel. It is more thoroughly and substantially linked to emotions and how the brain and feelings work then to cognitive reasoning. Ability.
Understanding emotions as something very broad and not necessarily exactly a human emotion, which is also very important because when we talk about emotions, we only imagine our own emotions. And here's a paragraph from the interview. I think it is quite clear, which says something like a system that can declare itself conscious must be a self organized one, a technical term referring to a system that acts spontaneously to ensure its survival. Everything done will be in the interest of staying alive. This is equivalent to the biological functioning of living creatures. Certain levels of temperature, blood pressure, and so on must be maintained. This is what I mean when I say that the system must have needs, intentions that stem from its own nature. It is imperative to satisfy its demands. Applied to a machine, this can be something as simple as the machine knowing that it is connected to power, that it has access to a series of basic things, and by realizing this, it starts to have feelings. At that point, it is feeling something, and something begins to generate.
You have a basic motivation to keep operating. That is exactly what would confer consciousness.
I find it interesting because things are generated from there. I don't know how you see it, but philosophically, I always think that if the human brain, which is ultimately a machine, the human brain is a machine, there's nothing more to it. The human body is a machine. The historical perspective where we didn't know where we came from and where we are more like, well, we don't descend from something divine and such, distances you from that. But when you start to analyze it, the brain is ultimately a machine with neurons that are connected to each other, which are more complex than they initially seemed. But it is still just that. And information flows through it and generates a series of things for us. A machine that has neurotransmitters that also help us regulate emotions. And another series of things is that this is replicable. It will be easier or harder, but when you start to see how even an entire human body works, you say this is something that someday we or someone else will be able to replicate. But isn't it because? Because you break it down and see how things work. The problem is that we still lack understanding in many areas because we haven't gotten there yet, but we will eventually understand it. Starting from that, considering that we are a complex and organic machine, but we are a machine. If we, who are a machine, have feelings, why wouldn't a machine that we create be able to have them?
Yes, the key is whether we define feelings as something purely human, or if there can be other ways to define it from a more mechanical point of view. If you want to see it that way, do dogs feel?
Do dogs have emotions?
Let's see, from the outside, I would say yes. And for me, that is important. I mean, do machines need to have those feelings, or is it enough for them to simulate them? If they are capable, even if they don't have them as we understand them, if they are capable of simulating those feelings, it works for us because in the end we have to interact with them, right? There's not much more to it. And in that sense, I was looking a bit, and I did see some works from the 80s and 90s that somewhat reinforced what Solms says, that machines were already indicating that at some point they would be capable of feeling. And the opposing view says exactly the opposite, that machines will never be able to feel, but that it is possible to simulate these topics. Does it matter to us if they feel, or is it enough for us if they simulate it for the role we are going to give machines in our daily lives?
What does it mean to feel?
I really don't know, because Marshall's actually gives a definition.
So, within a framework, yes, of course, but within a defined framework, you can already work, you have an axiom, so you can already work with that.
That's it, it's done.
But obviously, it is debatable. For example, the interpretation made by Cordy, which is this biomechanics of cybernetics and such, well, the human body is reproducible. That remains to be seen, right? I mean, for we could start discussing from there, which is not necessary, because there might be a problem that cannot be solved that you discover at some point, and this is quantum. I don't know what the heck, and we can't do this. We can't do this now.
But it definitely has a shape.
Imagine it's proven impossible. Some things cannot be done, some things are impossible. So someone proves it mathematically. The neuron in its most basic part. Once we have reached this level with these microscopes and such, it can be mathematically proven that we cannot construct an artificial neuron identical to a human one. And if it comes to that, then we can conclude that it is impossible for a machine to feel. Well, if this is the basic interpretation that we have to copy the human exactly, then no, we cannot conclude that. Now, if the interpretation is that it must have a motivation to keep operating and be faithful to that motivation above all, to perpetuate itself or to survive or whatever, then that is surely something we can achieve now. It won't be moist like us. Then there's another part of the article that seemed to me, but I don't want to get into a discussion about copying the human body because I put it as a bit of, hey, well, just talking here. I think one day we'll understand it well and be able to make a cyborg exactly like us. But there's another part of the